Good morning. Today I would like to talk about two slaves, two brides. In Torah it tells us that if you conquer in battle a slave owner and you take his slaves from him, and one of the slaves you become attracted to and you want to marry her, that there's a process that you have to go through in order to do that. You have to allow her to grieve for 40 days, and then you bathe her and dress her in fine clothes, and then you can take her as your bride. If you look at the overall picture of Scripture, it paints a wonderful, wonderful story, and this is part of it. If we go back to the time of Joseph, when he was taken captive, sold into slavery, and ended up in Egypt, and eventually became second in charge of the whole nation of our empire of Egypt at the time, we see that it was under the Hyksos that he gained that kind of power. The Hyksos were people from the Mediterranean area that had invaded Egypt, had conquered the lower part of Egypt, and chased the Egyptians to the upper part of Egypt and Sudan. Joseph gained this power, and he brought his family, his 70 members of his family from Israel over to Egypt during time of famine so that they could survive. And they settled in the Goshen area, which is the lower Nile Valley Delta area. That's very moist and very lucrative for raising animals and for raising crops. And they prospered. Eventually, the Egyptians in Upper Egypt wanted Egypt back. So they massed an army and they invaded Lower Egypt and chased the Hyksos out. The problem that they had when they did that was that the Israelites had become so prosperous and had multiplied so greatly that they feared that if the Hyksos tried to come back and reinvade Egypt, that the Israelites would side with the Hyksos, of course, because they were treated very well under Hyksos rule. So they were put in slavery. And we see God picking Moses to go back and to start negotiations with Pharaoh. Pharaoh was considered the incarnation of the god Ra, the Egyptian god Ra. So when the 10 plagues were brought about, as Moses pleaded to let the Israelites go, it was a war between the God of Israel and the God of Egypt. And we see that eventually the God of Israel won out. The Israelites were released. And then they spent 40 years wandering in the desert, which is equivalent to the 40 days that the captured slave girl has to be allowed to mourn and to get over the loss that she suffered. And finally, he takes Israel through the Jordan and into the Promised Land, which is his home. And we see this very pictorially, and it's a wonderful, wonderful story. And he takes Israel for his bride. At Mount Sinai, he lays out the covenant. It's put into effect when they enter the land of Israel, and she becomes his bride. That's a captured slave bride. On the other hand, there's another, which is the purchased slave, or the purchased slave bride. In this instance, if you purchase a slave and you want to marry her, there's no prerequisites. You can just go ahead and marry her because she is your possession. You didn't have to conquer anybody to get her. You purchased her with your own money. So she's automatically yours. And if we look at these two stories in the form of two covenants, the first covenant, which God made with Israel, was an everlasting covenant. It has not ended. It remains in effect forever and ever. He has taken Israel as his bride, as a captured slave bride. On the other hand, if we look at the new covenant, we see that Jesus came to purchase a bride, and he has picked the people that he has wanted to become his bride. And that's through a purchase agreement. So there is no lag time period there. He can marry her automatically. And one famous statement from the New Testament, I'm sure that everybody will recognize, for God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever should believe on him should not perish but have everlasting life. The first part of that is God so loved the world. In Hebrew thought, the world was everything outside of Israel, but it did not include Israel. And if we see that in the same aspect, that world does not include Israel. Israel already has a covenant with God from Mount Sinai on. The new covenant is for everybody outside of Israel, or the Jewish people, that they can be brought in to the same covenantal relationship that Israel has enjoyed. And it's a wonderful, wonderful thing if we really take a good look at it and appreciate that everything in Scripture in its own way depicts another story, a bigger picture. And this is one of them. That you have God with his bride, which were the conquered slaves, the conquered bride, and Jesus with his bride, which is the purchased bride. And I just challenge everyone today to research it and look it up and really see what a beautiful, beautiful picture this is. Thank you and have a good day.